The night before a main event in Qatar, at the ceremonial weigh-ins, in front of cameras, Arman Tsarukyan leaned in during the face-off and headbutted Dan Hooker. He broke his nose. The night before the fight, that is not a shove. That is not a stare-down that went a second too long. That is a man putting his forehead through an opponent's face at a promotional event, roughly 24 hours before they were contracted to fight each other in front of the world. Dana White later confirmed that incident was a factor in Tsarukyan being passed over for the interim lightweight title fight at UFC 324. And here is the part that makes this story different from every other troublemaker in this sport. A few weeks before his next headline-generating incident, the UFC's own chief business officer, Hunter Campbell, reportedly told him to keep doing exactly what he was doing. So how did the guy the sport keeps having to write disclaimers about become the one lightweight nobody can control? To understand him, you have to go back a very long way, to a childhood spent in a country he doesn't represent, in a sport that isn't this one. Arman Tsarukyan was born on October 11, 1996, into an Armenian family in Russia's Far East. His nickname, Ahalkalakets, comes from Akhalkalaki, the heavily Armenian region of Georgia his family is rooted in. For years, the UFC listed him as fighting out of Georgia. Depending on which broadcast you watched, he was Georgian, Armenian, or Russian, and the answer to which one has always been all three. The one thing that has never been complicated about him is the wrestling. He came up in freestyle, seriously and early, and earned Master of Sport, which in that system is not a participation award. It is a formal, state-recognized rank. Before he was ever an MMA fighter, he was a legitimately credentialed wrestler in one of the deepest wrestling cultures on the planet, and that is the foundation everything else got built on top of. He turned professional at 19 and fought on the European regional circuit, in rooms with a few hundred people in them, against opponents nobody was scouting. He was 12-0 by the time the UFC came calling, and he had done it without a single loss, a single controversy, or a single person outside the region knowing his name. And then he did something at 22 years old that the sport is still talking about. On April 20th, 2019, on 6 days' notice, Arman Tsarukyan made his UFC debut against Islam Makhachev. Read that again. 6 days. Against a man who would go on to become one of the greatest lightweight champions in the history of the promotion and a pound-for-pound #1. Tsarukyan was 22, unknown, and had taken the fight essentially off the street. He lost a decision. He also took Makhachev into deep water, reversed positions on him, and made it competitive enough that people who had never heard his name walked out knowing it. That fight is still cited as one of the best UFC debuts anybody has ever had. More importantly, it is still the reason a substantial section of the sport has never stopped arguing that Tsarukyan is the single hardest matchup at 155 pounds. Nobody else has taken Makhachev into that kind of water and come out with their reputation enhanced by losing. Then he did what fighters with that kind of engine do. He built. He beat Olivier Aubin Mercier. He beat Davi Ramos. He beat Christos Giagos, Joel Alvarez, Damir Ismagulov, Joaquim Silva, and Renato Moicano. In between, he lost a genuinely disputed split decision to Mateusz Gamrot in 2022 that a large portion of the audience scored the other way, and that remains one of only 3 defeats of his entire professional career. In December 2023, in Austin, they gave him Beneil Dariush in a main event. Dariush was a top 5 lightweight, a black belt, a veteran of 100 hard rounds, and a man who had never been finished with strikes in the UFC. Tsarukyan knocked him out in 64 seconds with a single right hand. That was the moment the division stopped treating him as a wrestler with a good chin and started treating him as a problem. 4 months later, at UFC 300, ever assembled, #1 contender. And on the walk to the cage that night, he punched a fan. The video went everywhere. A spectator flipped him off during his walkout, and Tsarukyan threw a punch in his direction. Dana White's first public reaction was to worry aloud about a lawsuit. The Nevada State Athletic Commission suspended him for 9 months and fined him $25,000. The fan, to his credit, publicly apologized for provoking him and made clear he wasn't pursuing it. 9 months suspension and a fine, and it delayed absolutely nothing about his career trajectory, because he was still the #1 contender when it expired. Think about what that tells a fighter. The most valuable card in the sport's history, in front of the biggest audience it had ever assembled, and a top contender threw a punch at a paying customer on his way to the cage. In almost any other professional sport on earth, that is a franchise-altering incident. Sponsors leave, statements get issued, careers pause. Here it became a viral clip, a fine, a suspension he served while ranked, and a story people tell affectionately, which brought him to UFC 311 in January 2025, and the title shot he had spent 6 years earning. Islam Makhachev, the rematch. The whole story closing the loop, he pulled out with 1 day's notice, a back injury during the weight cut, according to his camp. Whatever the medical reality, the optics were catastrophic. He withdrew from a world title fight the day before it was supposed to happen, and Dana White's response was public and blunt. He'd gone to the back of the line. That is the pattern this entire video is about, and it has a very specific shape. Talent creates the opportunity. Something outside the cage burns it down. And then the talent simply creates the opportunity again, because there is nobody else in the division who can do what he does. Most fighters get one of those. He has had 3, and the queue keeps reforming behind him. He came back in November 2025 in Qatar and submitted Dan Hooker with an arm triangle in the 2nd round. And the night before that fight, he headbutted him. That is a genuinely extraordinary sequence when you lay it flat. He broke his opponent's nose at a ceremonial weigh-in, then fought him the next night, then choked him unconscious. The fight went ahead. The commission didn't stop it. And the only real consequence was that when the interim title fight got made a couple of months later, his name wasn't on it. That fight also tells you something about how the promotion actually feels about him. He broke a headliner's nose the night before a card the UFC was selling, and the card went ahead. The fight happened. The broadcast covered it. Nobody pulled the plug on a main event over a headbutt because pulling it would have cost more than the headbutt did. Then came the part that has nothing to do with the UFC at all, and it is where the control problem stops being behavioral and becomes structural. Because Arman Tsarukyan doesn't just fight for the UFC, he wrestles for somebody else. He has been competing under the Real American Freestyle banner, a professional freestyle wrestling promotion, while ranked number 2 in the world in a UFC division. Not training, competing. Live events, other people's broadcasts, other people's cards, in a different combat sport, between UFC bookings. By his own count, he went 5-0 in RAF across 2026 before running into Colby Covington and dropping a 5-3 decision in July. He is scheduled to wrestle Dillon Danis in October. He has wrestled Tony Ferguson. He is, functionally, running a parallel career on a promotion the UFC does not own, in a sport where he can absolutely get hurt at exactly the moment the lightweight title picture is being decided. Sit with the risk profile of that for a second. A wrestling match is not a light workout. It is full contact competition against trained opposition with real injury exposure, and he is doing it repeatedly, on camera, between the biggest fights of his career. If a UFC contender tore a knee ligament in somebody else's wrestling promotion 3 weeks before a title eliminator, there is no version of that conversation that goes well for anybody. He does it anyway, and the promotion has, as far as anyone can tell, not stopped him. And it has produced exactly the incidents you'd expect. In December, he was criticized for throwing a knee during a wrestling match against Mehdi Baidulayev. Then at RAF 6 in Tempe, Arizona, he beat Georgiopoulos 5-3. A content creator and former collegiate wrestler known for viral street takedown videos, and the match had been chippy from the opening whistle, with both men slapping at each other and the referee stopping it repeatedly to restore order. When it ended, Tsarukyan tackled him and started throwing punches. Not a shove, not a shouted word. Punches, after the whistle, in a wrestling match. It turned into a brawl that security and both corners had to break up and that nearly spilled into the crowd. 3 high-profile incidents in under 2 years, and that one happened completely outside the UFC's jurisdiction, on a card the UFC had no involvement in a sport the UFC doesn't promote. Brendan Schaub summarized the promotion's position more honestly than the promotion ever would. The UFC can't meaningfully discipline him because he is too skilled and too valuable to lose. And that is the actual answer to the question this video is asking. Discipline in this sport is not a moral instrument, it is a commercial one. A promotion punishes a fighter when punishing him is cheaper than keeping him happy. With a replaceable prospect, that maths is easy. With the number 2 lightweight in the world on a 5-fight streak, with wins over Oliveira and Dariush, and an audience that follows him across platforms, it stops being easy very quickly. Every option available to them costs them more than it cost him. And then there is the content, which is genuinely relentless. Arman Tsarukyan is one of the most online fighters in the sport, and he does not filter anything. He vlogs constantly. Weight cuts, training, recovery, travel, arguments, downtime, all of it. Uploaded on his own schedule with his own edit. He posts through fight weeks, he posts through injuries. He posts through periods when a normal contender's management team would have his phone in a drawer. And crucially, he announces his own career news on his own channels before the promotion gets to it. That sounds like a small thing, and it isn't. In the traditional arrangement, the UFC controls the reveal, because the reveal is the product. Tsarukyan has repeatedly leaked his own bookings, teased his own dates, and told his audience where he expects to fight before anybody at the promotion has confirmed a thing. When the sport spent months waiting to hear what was next for him, the information kept surfacing through him, on his platforms, on his timeline. That is a fighter who has decided he is the primary broadcaster of his own career, and everybody else can catch up. He runs a permanent feud with Ilia Topuria across social media that has been going for years and shows no sign of resolving. And he does it in a way that gets replayed on every MMA channel within an hour. He gives interviews where he casually restructures the entire division's matchmaking out loud, at one point suggesting Topuria should fight Makhachev before fighting him, on the reasoning that losing to Makhachev would be less damaging for Topuria than losing to him would be. That is not a soundbite somebody wrote for him. That is a man narrating his own division in real time. He turned up to a fight week in a cowboy hat, which became its own news cycle. And when somebody finally asked him about it, he explained that he bought it in Texas because a friend suggested he should. That was the entire reason. No angle, no gimmick, no sponsor. He just wanted the hat, so he wore it, and the sport spent 2 days discussing it. He publicly placed $1 million bet on the outcome of Topuria versus Gaethje. Not a prediction, not a pick on a podcast. A wager, announced out loud on a UFC world title fight by the #2 contender in that exact division, on 2 men he could plausibly be matched against within a year. There is no version of a traditional sports league where any of that survives contact with a compliance department. In the NFL, most of it ends a career inside a week. In the NBA, the gambling item alone is a lifetime problem. In the UFC, it becomes the promotional material, and the clips get posted by the same accounts that would be issuing the statement anywhere else. And here is why it holds up. The same reason it always holds up. He wins. He is 23-3 as a professional and 10-2 inside the UFC, on a 5-fight winning streak, ranked #2 in the division and inside the pound-for-pound top 15. He averages over 3 takedowns per 15 minutes, with a striking output that has climbed every year he has been in the promotion. He is 5'7" with a 72-inch reach, which is a genuinely absurd build for the weight class, and he uses every inch of it. His only career losses are Makhachev on 6 days' notice as a 22-year-old, a split decision to Gamrot that plenty of people scored for him, and one more early in his career. That is it. 3 defeats in roughly a decade, one of them against the best lightweight of the modern era on less than a week of preparation, and none of them since 2022. Nobody in the top 10 of that division has a cleaner resume, and everybody in it knows exactly how the fight goes if they get matched with him. He takes you down. He holds you there. He makes it miserable. And in recent years, he has added enough on the feet that standing up isn't a solution either. The antics only work if you win. That's the whole mechanism. And it is the exact combination the sport has never had an answer for. Punch a fan, get suspended, come back and knock out a top 5 contender, headbutt a man at a weigh-in, lose a title shot over it, and then choke him out anyway. Get into a brawl at somebody else's wrestling event and remain the most avoided man at 155 pounds. That is the entire trade. The sport gets a fighter who generates content, headlines, and highlight reel finishes across 2 combat sports simultaneously. He gets to operate on his own terms, because the alternative is losing him. And nobody is willing to find out what a lightweight division without Arman Tsarukyan looks like. And the division above him is genuinely chaotic right now. Justin Gaethje took the undisputed lightweight title from Ilia Topuria at the White House card in June. Charles Oliveira is carrying the BMF belt. Paddy Pimblett just choked out a top contender in under a minute. Quillan Salkild is climbing from underneath at a frightening rate. There is no orderly queue at 155, and the man with arguably the best resume in it is a fighter the promotion has spent 2 years trying to figure out how to handle. For a while this summer, reports had him headlining UFC 331 in Los Angeles in a title fight. Then reports said he wouldn't be permitted to challenge for Oliveira's BMF belt on that card. What actually got announced on the 5th of August was Arman Tsarukyan versus Maurizio Ruffi in the co-main event underneath Joshua Van and Alexandra Pantoja. Read that as what it is. The #2 lightweight in the world, on a 5-fight streak, in a co-main slot against a man outside the top 10 on a card headlined by a flyweight rematch. That is a promotion trying to find something for a fighter it cannot simply push to the front. He'll almost certainly win it. That's the point. That's always been the point. And when he does, the division has the same problem it had in January, and in November, and at UFC 300. The most avoided fighter at 155 pounds will be sitting there with another finish on the record, another vlog uploaded, another wrestling match booked, and a title shot that has to be given to him eventually because there is no defensible reason left not to. So that's why nobody can control him. Not because he's untouchable, and not because he's louder than everybody else, but because every single thing that should have cost him something has instead left him more valuable than he was before. Punch a fan, and the fight still happens. Withdraw from a title shot, and you're still the #1 contender 11 months later. Break a man's nose at a weigh-in, and you finish him the next night. Compete in a different combat sport for a different promotion, and get told by a UFC executive to keep doing exactly what you're doing. He took a fight with the future greatest lightweight of his era on 6 days' notice at 22 years old, and made it competitive enough that losing it built his career. He has lost 3 times in a decade, and not once since 2022. He has knocked out a top 5 contender in 64 seconds, beaten a former champion on the biggest card in the sport's history, and choked out a main event opponent whose nose he had broken the previous evening. And he has spent the last 2 years demonstrating publicly and repeatedly that the only person setting the terms of Arman Tsarukyan's career is Arman Tsarukyan. He picks what he posts. He picks when he announces. He picks which other sport he competes in on the weekends. The promotion picks the opponent eventually, and even that has taken them the better part of a year to work out. And another fighter who turned unmanageability into leverage the sport couldn't take back is Conor McGregor, except his version of the experiment eventually ran out of road. To see where the difference actually is, check out this video next. Thanks for watching.